People who witnessed a murder, what is your story? Redditor 41. It's not exactly murder, maybe, I guess you can decide. I'll try to make it a fast one. I was a medic in Afghanistan. A few people got injured in an eyed blast, one of which was a kid, around 14-15 years old. We had limited resources, so sometimes you can only save a certain number of people, those who are most likely to be saved. The immediate casualties come first, and sometimes you have to let the others who are too far gone just kinda sit there, I guess. You make them comfortable and talk to them, but there's not much you can do. Anywho, the reason I equate it to murder is, when we saw what we had in numbers, we realized we could save one, a guy that had lost quite a bit in the blast, and there wasn't much we could do for the kid. So I gave him some pain meds, to help him relax, and help him sleep. And he did, he went to sleep and never got to wake up. It was a murder in the grand scheme depending on your viewpoint, but I truly felt like I was the one dealing the final blow, even if it was for mercy. He was a local, I never got to learn his name, or anything about him apart from the short time I spent with him before working on the other casualties. Redditor 42. My neighborhood is pretty wild, so there are probably even better stories, but the one I remember is this. It was about 5 years ago. This gang leader, man, he was a big deal, mafia connections and stuff, had just got released from prison. I don't know much about the backstory, but he had some dirt with a nightclub owner that happened to be my neighbor. The gang attacked the nightclub that night. Tables were thrown off windows, fire alarm went on, and we obviously heard gunshots back to back. Me and my dad rushed to the balcony, very dumb of us, and we saw this naked guy with only a towel around his waist who was walking out of hammam. Hammam is like a public bath. In Turkish, it's common here. The man ran to the nightclub big, he was just curious, and then boom. I saw the exact moment he got shot from his chest. We later found out he was the only one who died that night. Nobody inside the nightclub was harmed. Redditor 43. Saw a guy push his passenger, an old man, out of a car. The car was screeching, speeding round a corner, the door flings open and the driver very clearly pushed the old man out. Not the greatest thing for a 10-year-old to witness. The even weirder thing was that as I stood there in shock while the old man was completely still in the road, a weird man walking past me chuckled and said, "It wasn't you, is it?" Then chuckled again. It hasn't affected my life, but think about it every now and then. Redditor 44. I watched a girl I know stab another girl. The other girl had a knife too. Was surreal watching two people stand and stab each other. I called an ambulance. The girl I knew nearly died as the knife hit an artery. Redditor 45. Me and my friends were on the bus. When the door opened, a guy ran in and pulled someone off the bus by his hair. Once outside, with one smooth and clean motion, slit his neck. It seemed like a professional hit, but I don't know for sure. We rushed to help him, but he died within seconds. Another time I was in Guatemala and there was a guy in a motorcycle in front of us. Another car pulled up next to him and ran him off the road. We saw him get launched off the road onto the rocks. My brother-in-law went to get help him. When he came back, his clothes were covered in blood and said nothing. He talked to the police and EMTs, and the rest of our car ride was silent. The final time I was asleep. It was about 3 a.m. and I heard shouting and footsteps. I went outside to check on it. It was really loud, so my next door neighbor also heard it. He works at the ER. When I got there, he was helping a man who had been stabbed several times around the abdomen. I called 911 and applied pressure to one of the stab wounds. When the EMTs arrived and took them away, I asked my neighbor if we saved that guy's life. He told me that nothing was for sure, but that he didn't think that guy was going to make it. Redditor 46. Around 1970, I was walking down Broadway in a commercial district in Seattle on the weekend in the early afternoon. I passed a cop who had stopped a man riding a Harley at the curbside. Suddenly the perp pulled out a .45, and when the cop saw the gun, he ran across 4 lanes of traffic to the store Marketime Variety across the street and sought cover behind the edge of the building. As he ran, the perp fired his gun at him repeatedly, but all the rounds missed. I was frozen with fear and just watched transfixed. The perp backed into the entranceway of a shop and continued firing. The cop raised his service revolver, two-handed, and squeezed off several shots. They all hit the guy, a few hit his chest. The thunk when struck was sickening. He collapsed. The cop holstered his gun and ran back across the street. Pulled the guy out of the doorway and rolled onto his back and began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Didn't help. Guy was stone dead. I will never forget it. Cops are special dudes. Redditor 47, bus in Poland with big side mirrors, went up on the curb a bit when attempting to pull into the bus stop lay-by at the tram station. Mirror took out a guy waiting for the bus. Slammed him in the head and killed him right there. Bus driver tried to drive away, bus passengers tried to stop him, bus ran over someone else but I don't know if they died too. Our tram had already started moving and left the station. We all dialed 112, and apparently police and ambulances got there pretty fast. I don't know what happened to the bus driver. Redditor 48, all the dozen or so murders I've seen in person have been when I'm visiting my hometown in Mexico. They've all more or less panned out the same from what I saw. Some bickering which lead to someone pulling out a knife or gun and killing the other person. And all of these occurred in fairly crowded areas. Later that week I would find out it was organized crime related. Whoever got done in was in hostile territory or under suspicion of messing around on their turf or members. P.S. If asked what did you see, just reply with, I didn't see shit. I don't know what you're talking about. Has worked for me on more than one occasion. Redditor 49, when I was around 12, my friend and I were tossing a football back and forth in the street. His parents were having one of their screaming matches when his mother burst out of the screen door. She made it about halfway across the street before there was the boom of a shotgun and down she went. Redditor 50, so I don't know what the legality is. Maybe it's considered manslaughter or I don't know. That's what lawyers are for. I see this happen more than I'd like to admit. I work for a company that puts cameras on utility trucks, mostly garbage trucks. So what will happen is, there will be like a 2-lane road and the helper on the back will attempt to cross to road to grab a bin, and either a car coming the other direction will hit him, or even worse, a car from behind the truck will attempt to pass and hit him. Saw this twice last month. Redditor 51, it was at a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert in Camden, New Jersey back in the early 2000s. Our high school friend group went down hours before the show to get drunk in the parking lots. The guy across the road from us was selling nitrous balloons out of his trunk. There is what is known as the nitrous mafia in Philadelphia who basically run the nitrous balloon selling game at all major events. They came by and told this kid to shut his tank off and get off their turf. The kid basically told them to duck off. About half an hour later they returned, walked up behind him and slit his throat. Our friend ran and flagged down a bike EMT and we all went into the show. On our way into the show a group of much older, very drunk Delco trash jumped us and beat us up pretty good because they didn't like what we were wearing, I think. Fucking terrible day. Redditor 52, not much to say, but I was walking from school and I lived in a bad neighborhood at the time, so I would pass this street called Pleasant. Ironic, isn't it? And there was a gang there who always had shit going on with other PPL, so one day I walked by and heard faint shouting, then 3 shots fired. I said duck all that and ran home Lamau. The next day I found out the kid who was shot went to my school. Redditor 53, I saw the second plane impact on 9/11 on live TV. Redditor 54, I was in middle school in USA. I bought nachos at the snack shack in front of school and waited for the bus. A guy walked up to a bald guy in a white shirt and black JanSport backpack and kept hitting him with a weird underhand swing. The white shirt guy turned to fight at the middle of the second swing. It was bloody. I was confused. The white shirt guy collapses and the other guy runs off. The guy on the ground kept taking struggled breaths while looking up at me. He died before the ambulance got there. I remember him looking so scared. Redditor 55, while leaving a RZA concert in 2007, 2 drunk men accidentally bumped into each other and exchanged words which quickly turned to blows and spilled into the street in front of the venue. One of the guys was trying to walk away from it with his hands up while the other was clearly the aggressor. Just as it looked like it was over, a Suburban pulled up and the aggressor walked over to the passenger side, opened up the door, grabbed a gun, and turned around and shot the guy who was walking away from point blank range at least 5 times and then turned and started firing into the crowd as well. The dude was dead in the street. I don't remember ever hearing if they caught the guy, but I distinctly remember what he looked like. Crazy time. Redditor 56, I was walking home from the liquor store just a block away from my apartment in LA. It was 10 p.m. as I pass a guy on the sidewalk. Another man about 20 feet away yells at him. I couldn't make out what he said. I remember thinking I don't want to get involved in that. Almost before the thought finishes, the second guy fires a gun at the first guy. I drop my chips and soda I bought, and without thinking or looking I run across the street. 4 shots went off in total. I know one of them was Amy because when I saw the spark fly from it hitting the ground in front of me as I ran across the street. I saw the guy with the guy running parallel to me on the other side of the street, and suddenly it dawns on me I need to call 911. By the time I looks back at the street from my phone, the man was gone. The first guy died in the liquor store I was just at. I only went back once before I moved about 2 months later. I don't know how I didn't get shot, and I don't know anything about what led up to it. I was the only witness, and detectives told me that something like this was really uncommon of the neighborhood. Fireworks still scare me sometimes. Redditor 57, I was with my cousin, his father and my father. This was in 2010 Mexico. Mind you, my uncle and his soon-to-be ex-wife weren't getting along at all whatsoever. Anyways, it's a Sunday and it's getting late, so we get in the car to go drop off my cousin next town. Since my uncle wasn't getting along with his wife, we parked down the street at a corner store. So as my uncle is saying bye to his son, a guy in a hoodie, we didn't know this at the time, but it was my aunt's brother, started chasing my uncle around the car with a knife. They made 3 laps around the car, and that's when my dad stepped out the vehicle with his 9mm Beretta and emptied his clip on the guy. My dad, being a hunter and army veteran, didn't miss a shot from his 14-round clip. Guy was dead before he hit the floor. My dad then fled the country only to be arrested and brought back. Yes, it was dumb for him to flee, but it was an unregistered firearm anyway. He did 2 years in prison for possession of an illegal firearm. This incident destroyed our family, but it's now been a decade and we've managed to get back on our feet. It's rare for me to hear from my father, but he gives me a call every now and then. Redditor 58, worked in a pub when I was younger. Walking round cleaning tables and emptying ashtrays. Back in the days you could smoke indoors. And a couple of guys are standing at a high table talking. Another guy comes in and starts shouting with one of the group, getting a bit heated, so I go over to ask them to calm it down and remove all empty glasses and bottles from the area. As I'm talking to them, the lone guy lunges with a knife, misses me but goes in the chest of the other. He moves into a bear hug with the guy he just stabbed and continues to stab him a further 14 times in the back before running out the building. Spent what seemed like hours putting pressure on the stab wounds, waiting for an ambulance, but the guy was dead before they got there. Police caught the guy. I gave a statement and spent a few days in court giving evidence and helping get the guy jailed. Not something I ever want to experience again, as it fucked me up for quite some time. Redditor 59, in the 1980s, I was touring the ship Queen Mary, which was permanently docked at Long Beach, California. They were hosting a motorcycle show on board that day, and the idiots had hired the Hells Angels as security. Open staircases were attached to the ship on the outside, allowing one to climb from the pavement level to entryways at any level of the ship. I was standing on the lowest landing of the staircase, about 10 feet above ground, when the rival Mongols Motorcycle Club showed up. Of course, a brawl broke out, immediately below me, with knives, fists, and chains. I saw a Mongol stab a Hells Angel in the back just as a string of police cars were coming over the causeway to break it up. I read in the paper that night that the Hells Angel had been stabbed in the kidney and had died. Surprisingly, it was the only fatality of the brawl. Edit, corrected which club member had killed which. Redditor 60, I was at a mass shooting. The Aurora Theater shooting. I was not in a theater, nor shot at. I was working on the surrounding roads as an intern for a construction company. Once the shooting ensued, a handful of us chose to stay and aid. That night was a shit show. I saw a lot of very terrible things. People with bullet wounds you don't see in movies. I was given a life-saving award for helping in saving the life of a 17-year-old kid shot in the head. I stayed and aided the police for 7 hours. That event caused severe PTSD that influenced and altered my life. I have sought treatment and am much better now. I will do a live broadcast of the entire event and post it to my page because the whole story truly takes an hour to explain. To really go through everything I saw that night. Feel free to ask any questions. Redditor 61, I watched my best friend die in front of me. We were at a party and some guys started shit and my friend tried to intervene. One of the guys pulled out a small pocket knife and stabbed him in the chest. Hit the corner of his heart. He died on scene. I watched him die. I'll never forget the look in his face when he was on the ground. Eyes rolled back. The small trickle of blood coming from his chest. I watched him die. Unfortunately been 24 years and still can picture it like yesterday. He was a great man and would have been a great American. I think about him every day. Love each other. That's all I can say. This stupid shot isn't worth lives. Love each other. Redditor 62, Valp, I was smoking a blunt on my friend's back porch one night when we heard a massive boom. Down the road, an Audi full of joy-riding kids had slammed into a family's minivan as they pulled out of a 7-Eleven. The kids in the Audi were fine despite blitzing down the road at about 60, and scattered immediately after the wreck. The driver of the van died there on the spot, and a little girl bled out before the EMTs could save her. Her screams grew fainter and fainter until they stopped. I'm calling it a murder cause those inconsiderate assholes took human lives through callousness and fled like cowards. Redditor 63, I was in my car, at a traffic light. Guy crossing the street recognized the driver of car on my 90 degrees right. Takes out the gun and shoots him through the front window. Driver manages to exit the car, stumbles to the middle of traffic crossing, drops and dies. Found out later in the news driver was the new boyfriend of killer's former GF. Seeing a dude die like this fucked with my head for few weeks at least. Redditor 64, it was this October in Quebec. I was outside and there was a lot of people and a guy with a sword killed 3 person and 2 of them were in front of me. I was scared as shit and I didn't know my body could run that fast for so long. Redditor 65, my mom witnessed her boyfriend and boyfriend's brother get murdered. She tells me that all she remembers is being in the car with her BF's brother lifeless body next to her and her BF asking her if his brother was alright. She kept telling him he was safe. He later died in the hospital. Redditor 66, I saw a hit and run in front of my house once but I guess that's more manslaughter not a murder. Redditor 67, my dad was murdered when I was a kid. We lived in a shitty part of Florida and he was very young 26. People came into the apartment right after the babysitter walked in. He was going somewhere that night, and she was coming to watch my brother and me. My brain blocked most of it out but I know they were there to rob my family. There was some altercation and a rapid fire of a handgun. I was in a back room, but my brother was right there and he suffers ear damage to this day. I've had lots of PTSD counseling so I'm not as freaked out by it anymore. I've always wanted to make a podcast about it or something. I know which prison the gunman is at. I think it's an interesting story though because the newspapers conflated the case and accused random people and basically ruined any real justice that could have come from the situation. It was bizarre for my family. Redditor 68, when I was 7 we went to this trailer park. There was a party at the building there 1,000 people there. I asked my parents if I could go to the toilet alone because I was a big boy. I go and I'm on my way back and I see a really creepy man following me in a full black suit. He looked like he was part of the Men in Black. He had a buzz cut and glasses. He looked at me and started to follow me to the toilet because I had turned around to safety and locked myself and I come out and he's gone. I'm terrified. A few days later in the newspaper we see a young boy was killed at that trailer park with the same description and in the same suit. Said the newspaper, rest in peace that kid. I feel so sorry for his family but also really scared that could have been me. I could be dead. There's my story. Redditor 69, my wife and I were sitting in our living room one Saturday and we heard pop, pop, pop. I went outside to see what it was and the corner store lady laying on the sidewalk. I could see blood pooling around her. She died. The woman who shot her was arrested. Turns out the lady stole a pack of gum and the corner store lady followed her out of the store with a gun. Then a few years later, I was wakened by another set of pop, pop, pops. It was summer and the window were open. I heard the guy yelling, "You killed me." So fucked. Redditor 70, I was about 12 when this happened. I remember sitting on my back porch with my family while we had a fire or something going. Our family heard a commotion at our neighbor's house that was behind our backyard. We could hear yelling and screaming and things being broken. We thought for sure it was a robbery. But we didn't go inside or called 911 until we heard a final scream, then about 5 gunshots. We all ran inside without saying a word and called 911. It turns out a woman was murdered by her ex and he did it out of rage or whatever, and at the time that woman was married, but her husband was at work or out of town. It was the talk of our little town, and I actually don't know if they found the guy. I just remember that surreal night. Anyway, thanks for reading. Redditor 71, the bank I work at is across the street from a pawn shop. One day, there was an argument in there and a man came out with the owner and shot him in the back of the head. My boss shut and locked all the doors and closed the metal shutters. Our armed guards had their weapons ready until the cops showed up. A gunfight ensued, and the man was shot dead. Can't say my first week at work was boring. At dinner that night, my husband asked how work went that day. I told him and started shaking. He then said that made the mouse that ran across the floor in his office seem minor. I think he was disappointed because he had a funny story about a mouse at work to tell and I ruined it by saying I saw a man shot and a police gunfight on the street at work. Redditor 72, my friend comes to visit from Florida for one night. We're at an after-hours club and I have a fake kid but he's of age. We're outside smoking. Some dude pulls up in a white car and walks over screaming with a gun to the bouncer. The bouncer pulls out his own gun and shot him 6 times. Turns out, bouncer was sleeping with the guy's wife. Guy fell on the hood of his white car, covering it in blood, and died. Cops showed up. Girl we were talking to outside has a big mouth and is telling the cops that her and I saw everything, and the bouncer wasn't the shooter, it was a drive-by. She was drunk and wrong. Cops grabbed me, her, and my Florida friend as witnesses to an alleged, but false, drive-by and brought us downtown. I filled out all the paperwork under my fake ID. Eventually came clean and admitted I was underage and that the it was fake once he started questioning its validity. Cop was pissed but let it ride. We had to stay downtown for 11 hours throughout this whole process of basically saying no, this girl's wasted, it was the bouncer, as they already knew. They gave us cheese sandwiches and let us smoke cigarettes in the station, but overall it was an absolutely drunken, terrible, and sleepless night. The friend I was with visiting from Florida never came back to visit. Redditor 73, as a kid, I grew up working with my non-profit parents in a third world orphanage. I saw the director of the orphanage murder 15 babies. She was supposed to order enough beds, food, supplies etc. from the government for all the babies, and there were about 30-35. Instead, she ordered enough for only 15 children, and pocketed the remaining money and let the other 15 die. I don't believe in God, but I believe in heck and that woman deserves its deepest realms. Redditor 74, I was going to school with my dad, our car drove by a store, and there was a little commotion in front of it. Turns out it was a mugging attempt. I more heard than saw it, but it really fucked me up. I was around 13 at the time. I got to school, sat down on the table, and started to shake. They called my dad a few minutes later to pick me up because I was clearly very shocked. Later it was on the news, and the guy had died immediately from the shot. A street camera captured the whole thing and you can see my dad's car pass by right when the guy gets shot. That was a weird week. Redditor 75, this happened in 2007 or around that. At the time my block was the border of 2 gang territories and basically had shootings every day. There was one time someone was shooting down the street for a gang initiation of some sort or maybe a gang fight. I was too young to understand those details. Although I remember seeing a lady in a blue car parked at the corner. I'm not too sure on the details here, but she was panicked and we waited for the EMS to arrive. Although what I do remember bright as day is the fire department laying her on a stretch and using a hand respirator on her and whisked her away. Redditor 76, I didn't witness it but my dad did when I was young and I remember being haunted by a story about it over the dinner table. Basically this teenage kid came running up to his truck and banging on the window asking my dad to let him into the car. My dad had no idea what was going on and didn't open the car, and seconds later the kid started to run away. A car came whipping around the corner and smacked right into the kid, killing him. The driver tried to say it was an accident, but given the speed he was driving in a residential area, and given what my dad saw, the guy was charged with murder. Redditor 77, I used to live in a real bad neighborhood that had a lot of drugs and gang violence. I swear that street had been shut down due to drug lab raids at least twice a year. There was a drug dealer who lived across the street and had a really nice green Dodge Charger that I loved. One night, I guess a drug deal went wrong, and I heard a lot of yelling, so I look out the window and I see the car up in flames. A few days as I'm getting home I see the same guy running down the street as 3-4 guys are chasing him with. One of the guys caught up to him and beat him to death with a baseball bat. We moved out within the year. Redditor 78, a week after I moved to London, a guy was shot outside my kitchen window. Redditor 79, 2011. Leavenworth, Kansas. I was in the military at the time, and a few of us decided to go off post to beal shit around the local Walmart. On the way back, we were driving when we heard shots. Having the training we had, we immediately knew it was a firearm, and not some fireworks or whatever. Turned to look, and there was a man running around cars in a barbershop parking lot, trying to evade gunfire. Needless to say, he didn't make it. A few months later, I got out. Went home. About a year later, the Leavenworth County prosecutor called, said I had to go back and testify. Felt like I was being watched the whole time I was in town. Haven't been back since. I've done horrible things, and seen horrible things. But one of the worst is the sound of the victim's mother screaming in court as I described her son's death to a judge. Fucking rough. Redditor 80, was driving with my sister coming home from a wedding reception. She slows the car down and says there is a body in the road. So she parks her car to block any cars from hitting the body. We get out of the car and a young woman is laying in a pool of blood, choking on her own blood. Her leg looked like a spaghetti noodle. I heard her gurgle of death. It was awful. Her abusive boyfriend who chased her out of a bar into oncoming traffic came back and sat with her and kept putting his hands in the blood, screaming and crying. The car who hit her kept driving. I guess technically not a murder, but she was scared and running from abuse and was killed by a hit and run. I remember looking for her story in the news. Her name was Melody and she had very young children. Redditor 81, an 11-year-old boy that got their throat slit in a public restroom. My mom tried to give him CPR and save him, but nothing could be done. This will probably get buried. Not sure if I'd wished I'd gotten here early enough to talk about it and try and process things, or glad it'll get buried and I can move along. I don't talk about it a lot, but I've never gotten over it. Redditor 82, I didn't directly witness it, but I spoke to the guy after he found his mom murdered by its own father with a hammer. He crushed the woman's skull. Reason was that she wanted to live freely and divorce him. They were Iraqis, so Islam is a thing there. She also started her driver's license. Redditor 83, I'm exposed to this stuff pretty regularly, not murders, but death period, but the ones that stick with me the most are the wrong way drivers. The most recent was on December 27th. This family was headed home. You can see where they tried to avoid each other because the driver's sides on both vehicles were totally destroyed. The family man saved his wife's life by doing that. Long story short, we had to cut both cars up to get them out. Family man died before we could get him out, but still had to perform life-saving measures since he was conscious when we got there. His 12-year-old daughter had a deep laceration down to her skull and is probably gonna lose her eye, and his wife had some type of head trauma. The drunk driver survived, of course, with a broken leg. I'm a little callous to shit like this by now, but the timing bothered me a lot. I just thought how just 2 days before they were celebrating Christmas and this fucking ashole ruined their lives forever. I forgot to mention that family man's son was in another vehicle behind them and saw the whole thing go down and saw us trying to get his parents and sister out. I felt for the kid seeing his dad in the condition he was in. Unfortunately, that wasn't my first or last time seeing this type of thing. Redditor 84, in 2014 or 2015 I saw 2 men savagely beat another with metal baseball bats. It was at a state prison, and when the EMTs arrived they wouldn't touch the body. It was too late. They brought out biohazard crew to clean up the gray matter from the floor. I had to wait with the corpse the rest of my shift in our receiving and discharge area. He had to remain cuffed until pronounced dead by the coroner. Redditor 85, Eastern Europe, 2004. Was very young and it was New Year's Day, right after the ball dropped. I was walking home and I saw two threaten a man for his wallet across the street. He didn't give it up and they started jumping him. They beat him very badly and he ended up dying. The only reason I know it is because it was in the newspaper the next day. That's about it. Redditor 86. Many years ago, I was at a pizza joint in Stockton, California for a company party. It was one of those pizza places that has those long benches and tables so different groups wind up sitting pretty close to each other sometimes. If you are aware, Stockton is Northern California's version of South Central LA, so there must have been a few different gangs here at the time. It was a big place, and I think a Friday or Saturday evening. I don't know what was going on, but some gang melee broke out and a guy who was before this sitting peacefully directly across the table from me got his head cracked open with one of those super heavy glass mugs with the handle and heavy base. He went down in a big pool of blood. I wanted no part of this and I walked right to the front door, and in that time, cops were already running in. I found out a few days later he died in a hospital. Redditor 87. Sitting in an ambulance drinking a peanut butter milkshake from a UDF. It's around 2-3 a.m. and we've been up all night. On the sidewalk in front of us, two guys start to fight. One pulls out a gun and shoots the other point blank many times. He ran, we scooped the dude and drove fast. Redditor 88, Revolucion Boulevard, Tijuana, 1994. Saw a Marine get kneed in the crotch, he bent forward in pain, takes a kick to the face, falls straight back onto the sidewalk. Dead. I was across the street, so probably 40 feet away. Next day in morning muster military meeting, we are told we can't go to TJ anymore. For a while at least. No emotions towards it. More of a numb thought to this day. Redditor 89. This happened on New Year's. I was taking Uber to my house and saw a kid around 16 or so head hit by a car. I called 911, went over to him and he died in my arms before the paramedics got there. Redditor 90. Was in 11th grade during open lunch. There was a small shopping complex with a donut shop and a liquor store right next to it. Saw a robbery gone bad and they shot the male 3 or 4 times. Saw him fall right in front of me and everyone ran. He was with his wife and a toddler. Still have flashbacks even though it was 10 plus years ago of him just hitting the concrete pillar and falling. Redditor 91. I'm not sure if the guy died, but I definitely at least saw an assault with deadly force. I grew up in kind of a rough town up until I transferred from community college. One day I was outside the library when I saw an older man and younger man obviously in an argument about something. The older man was dressed smart casual. In my mind's eye he's wearing a brown sweater and red chinos with leather shoes. He definitely had glasses on, as I distinctly remember them getting knocked off his face. The younger man, to me, was more nondescript. He was likely in whatever streetwear was fashionable at the time. This would have been around 2015, so maybe some tight jeans, bright colors, and some article of clothing with a Sesame Street character. The argument was too far for me to hear its actual subject. Could have been a family conflict, or a classmate dispute, maybe just two strangers who'd felt disrespected in the moment. They're really in each other's face and, honestly, my default attitude is that the young man must have done something dickish to instigate this. Cooler heads prevail and they both begrudgingly untangle themselves and head out in opposite directions. They're maybe 20 feet apart when the older man sneaks a backwards glance, pivots, and starts stalking up behind the young man. As he approached, nobody said a word. Maybe the bystander effect has us all. Maybe we're all just shocked because we made the assumption that the older man must have been righteous here. His first punch lands clean on the side of the young man's head, but it doesn't drop him. His second swing goes wide as the young man ducks and swings around to respond. The melee starts and so do the newly awakened calls to stop the violence. From what I remember, both men were sloppy, but the young man was faster. Eventually, a wide hook lands flush on the older man's face and he goes down. This is when the murder potentially starts. I don't remember if the older man went down cleanly or if he attempted to get up and was knocked back down by more blows from the young man's higher position. I do remember that, once the older man was still, the young man's temper was still flared. He kicked the prone man in the ribs and yelled at him, and all of us, about cheap shots and cowardice. No one responds. The young man, still in a fury, stomps on the head of the older man. I don't remember if he was face up or on his belly. The first stomp again solicited no verbal response from the newly formed crowd. I don't believe his foot landed cleanly, and the older man, or at least his body, also gave no reply to the stomp. The second stomp, however, woke all of us from our stupors and sent the older man's arms and legs into spasms. A cacophony of general protests arose, but had no effect on the young man, who gave a third stomp with similar affect. After this, a friend of mine stepped forward from the crowd and directly pleaded with the young man to stop. This got the young man's attention and, after some back and forth about no one seeming to care when the young man was initially assaulted, he stormed off as the crowd hesitantly parted for the possible murder suspect. I believe I was one of the first to call the police, who seemed wholly uninterested in responding now that the assaulter was no longer in my field of vision. It was evident that no one in the area had medical training, as the old man was left to his own devices save for some concerned strangers standing idly near him waiting for the police to come. It was roughly 15 minutes before campus security came and began working on the man, and another 30 after that before we heard sirens in the parking lot. I never got a call back to give a testimony or description of the young man, and I never received a crime alert from our campus notification system. As far as I know, the young man got off without consequence. Redditor 92, so, does war count as murder? I was in Iraq during the surge. Saw plenty of people have horrible things happen to them. The first one I didn't even have time to acknowledge that a guy in the HMMWV died next to me. I was busy trying to not get killed. To think about it, I didn't even know it. I pissed and shit myself and didn't know about that until later on. A few years later I ended up in prison. My second day at my facility, as we were leaving the yard, I saw a guy move up and stab a dude probably 10 times or so in his back and side. Dude crumpled to the ground. I did what the guy next to me did, shut my fucking mouth, step over the body and keep moving. My reaction was more of so that's what a knifing in prison looks like. Actually, the one that sticks with me is the 18-year-old kid that got gang-RP'd by 5 guys. His screams at first and his subsequent crying are around with me to this day. I don't have much issue with human death. There are things worse than death. Redditor 93, I was home alone in Oakland, California and was 9 when I saw a pregnant woman running from her apartment across the complex parking lot. A man ran after her and shot her in the back. He looked around afterwards, and even though I know he probably didn't see me, I locked the doors and hid under the laundry pile in my dad's closet. My parents came home a few hours later, and even though I heard their voices, I was too scared to move. I didn't tell them what happened until years later, and neither believed me, but I have diagnosed OCD and have had to triple check door locks, even getting up in the middle of the night to check, so I know what I saw. Redditor 94 was playing a show back in 2013 in downtown San Jose, California on a Friday night. Just finished my set and was outside smoking a cigarette with a friend. Looked down the street and saw 2 good-looking women with a guy standing on the corner waiting to cross the street. Some dude was jaywalking across a busy street, which caught my eye, and as he approached the guy with the 2 girls, he just sucker punched the guy as hard as he could, which I heard from half a block away. Dude fell back and cracked his head on the curb. The girls start screaming and me and my buddy run over to see if we can help. Nope. This guy was convulsing and bleeding out his ears and chewing his tongue to shreds. The girls take their tops off to try to use as pillows, bandages, and a few moments later, dude stopped moving. All that was left was just a river of blood leaking out of his skull and ears. Cops showed up moments later, took vitals, and 5 minutes later the guy had a white sheet over him. Don't know if they caught the guy that hit him. Redditor 95, when I was 13, me and a friend stayed up all night practicing our best Britney Spears choreography when we heard some noise outside. We peeked out the window and saw a man beating up his pregnant girlfriend in their front yard. Then a group of men jumping another off to the side. One pulled out a gun and unloaded into the one guy they were beating up. They then stuffed him in a car and drove away. Police tried to get us to identify suspects in the case, but I could never really be sure on the potential suspects they showed us. The second murder happened on that street just about a year later. We were unloading groceries from our car one evening when these two white males who were loitering on the corner close to our house ran out into the street in front of a moving vehicle and unloaded the gun into the windshield. My mom ran in the house when she heard the gunfire, but I froze like a deer in the headlights. It happened so quickly. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran inside and my mom was calling 911. When police arrived, I saw the shooter speaking to police and called an officer over to let him know what I had saw. Turns out the men were undercover officer in a drug sting. They murdered this man. They never identified themselves as officers to the suspect or anyone. Redditor 96, when I was 6 years old, after school my best friend, Victor, and I got off the bus lived across the street from one another, and he had invited to come with him to change clothes so we could play at the nearby park together. I went with, and we were racing another across the busy street, ran through bushes our shortcut, and made it just out the perimeter of his yard when we came to an abrupt halt. We started as my friend's dad was yelling very, very loudly at my friend's dad's brother. I slowly kept creeping forward as to get to my friend's trailer house, when we heard them threatening to kill one another. My friend of course didn't want that to happen and ran towards his father as I was still creeping closer in between these men fighting. Almost in 1 second, my friend got to his father. His uncle had pulled out a gun, yelled "I hate you mother F." And we both witnessed the uncle shoot my friend's father in the chest. My friend screamed out and wailing as I stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. His uncle ran up to my friend and his dad, who had fallen to the ground, and kicked my friend to the ground. I yelled out in a concerned and trembling voice, "Victor." My friend put his hand up and screamed, "Run. Call the police." Shocked and scared, my little 6-year-old legs did just that. I ran as fast I could through the bushes, crossed the street with tears streaming down my face, not looking both ways, as I heard a second gunshot go off behind me, made it to my mom's apartment and called 911. The police came. My friend's dad was pronounced dead at the scene. At school the next day, my dear friend wasn't there. Never showed up again. I knew in my gut that that second gunshot had taken my friend's life as well. We were just two little 6-year-olds trying to go to the park after school, and we got caught in the crosshairs of family violence. A part of me died that day. I eventually moved and went to therapy, and even my therapist claimed that that was a false memory that I had believed to be real from a bad dream experience. I got in contact with this friend's relatives later in life and they confirmed what I had remembered. That's my story. Redditor 97 was valeting, and across the street some guys jumped out of a car and started fight a dude. During the scuffle, dude was holding his own against the 3 guys. One of them pulled a gun and pop, dude went down. Guys jumped back in the car and sped away. Dude's girlfriend, who was with him, screamed and draped herself over him. Found out later in the news the guys in the car catcalled the girlfriend. He said something back, they took offense and started the fight. He was an 18 years old kid. Just senseless. I just was in a shocked state the rest of the night. Redditor 98, 2 doors down from the house I grew up in lived an older couple. Their son 30-ish came to house sit for a few days while they were on vacation. 2 robbers must have scouted the house and attempted to rob them the day after they left. Little did they know the couple's son was inside and armed. The son heard the break-in and ran downstairs to find the robbers, who attempted to flee. He shot one of them a couple of times and the guy ended up dead in the driveway while the other got away. I can still remember the police holding us from leaving our house. Then when passing the neighbor's house to leave the man's body laying there. White wife beater covered in blood, pool of blood under his chest, eyes still open. TLDR, neighbor's son shot a robber dead in the driveway. Police left the body uncovered. Redditor 99, I was on a bus in Tijuana, maybe 2-3 years ago, at a red light in heavy traffic. There was a woman driving a small van next to us. I happened to look up from my phone just in time to see a guy walk up, dome her, and jog away. Just blood and chunks everywhere. I have seen some pretty gruesome shit on the internet, but seeing it in real life was still a little gut-wrenching. It could have been gang or narco related, but I don't want give baseless speculations. And thank God the window was closed, because the sound was insanely loud and painful. Redditor 100, this one is weird AF. I was 12 and I was jumping from couch to couch when I suddenly heard fireworks noises, but as a dumb kid I laid down on the ground pretending I was shot. Moments later I see people grouping outside. A dude was killed 10 meters away from my building. Recently I found this neighborhood girl attractive. As I was trying to find her IG, I came across her brothers. So her brother became a familiar face for me. Week later dude gets shot 14 times accidentally.